in a room full of people all striving for success. Some play fair, work hard, and stay true to their values. Others lie, manipulate, and trample over anyone in their way, and yet it's often the ruthless ones who climb the highest. Why is the world truly rigged in favor of the worst?
That while Nietzsche observed at one point that most of what people regard as morality is just cowardice, and what he meant by that was that people don't do bad things not because they're good, but because they're afraid to do the bad things. And then when they see people do the bad things, they're actually really deeply attracted by that because it speaks to part of them that could go beyond the rules. And that's actually a necessary part. It's a really necessary part. Like, you don't make men safe by making them weak. In fact, they're much more dangerous when they're weak because they'll stab you in the back when they get the chance, or take advantage of you when they get the chance. You make men safe, let's say, by making them strong, and then by making sure that they're disciplined.
Are so precious to us.
Among us, history, politics, and business, everywhere you look, you'll find examples of individuals who, despite their lack of morality, have achieved extraordinary power. From ruthless emperors to cutthroat CEOs, the pattern repeats itself, but this isn't just a coincidence. It's a feature of human nature, deeply embedded in our evolutionary psychology and social structures. In a world where resources are scarce, competition is inevitable. Those who hesitate and seek fairness at every turn often find themselves left. Meanwhile, who are willing to exploit, deceive, and dominate rise to the top. This harsh reality forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Is morality a weakness in the game of power? Yet the paradox is this. While the worst people often succeed in the short term, history is also filled with stories of their downfall. The question is not just why they rise, but whether their success is sustainable and, more importantly, what ends for those of us who refuse to abandon our principles and see power as an undeniable force of life.
We'll get this California gold through. General Grant will have our scalps anyway. Pushing through, Sergeant.
Something neither good nor evil in itself, but simply a truth of existence. To understand why the worst people succeed, we must first understand the nature of power itself. And to do that, we need to dive into one of Nietzsche's most controversial ideas, master morality versus slave morality. Let's go deeper. Imagine two warriors standing on a battlefield. One is strong, decisive, and fearless. He takes what he wants, shapes the world to his will, and does not ask for permission. The other is hesitant, waiting for external validation, seeking fairness, and hoping the world will reward his virtue. Which of these two is more likely to survive? Which is more likely to rule? Friedrich argued that morality itself is not a universal truth, but a creation of power struggles throughout history. He saw two fundamental moral systems, master morality and slave morality. These are not just abstract concepts. They explain why ruthless individuals often rise to dominance while those who prioritize kindness and fairness struggle. Master morality is the morality of the strong, the rulers, the conquerors. It is based on values like strength, courage, ambition, and power. To the masters, what is good is what enhances their ability to dominate, create, and assert their will upon the world. They do not seek approval, they define their own worth, a responsibility for their destiny, and do not see weakness as something to be protected. It is merely something to be overcome. Slave morality, on the other hand, is the morality of the oppressed, the powerless, those who cannot impose their will directly. Instead of celebrating strength, it glorifies humility, obedience, and self-sacrifice. It teaches that suffering is noble and that power is inherently evil. Nietzsche saw this as a moral system created by those who lack the ability to dominate, a psychological adaptation that allowed them to survive in a world controlled by the strong. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Ruth's slave morality does not prevent the rise of the ruthless. It enables it by condemning ambition, by shaming the pursuit of power. It leaves power in the hands of those who do not care about morality at all. While the noble-hearted hesitate, those who embrace master morality take control, and in a world where hesitation equals defeat, the results are inevitable. So what does this mean for us? Should we abandon morality and embrace the ruthless path? Or is there another way to reconcile strength and virtue? To answer that, we must look deeper into the psychology of those who rise to power, the ones who refuse to be victims of circumstance. Picture a vast, untamed wilderness. In this world, survival is not about fairness or kindness. It's about strength, adaptability, and the willingness to do whatever it takes. A lion does not ask permission to hunt. The storm does not apologize for its destruction. A chur does not reward morality. It rewards those who can endure, those who can dominate. Human society is no different beneath our laws and social contracts. The primal battle for survival still rages. Those who rise to power often share a defining trait: ruthlessness. Not necessarily cruelty, but the ability to act decisively, unburdened by hesitation or guilt. This is not an accident. It is an evolutionary adaptation, a mechanism that has allowed individuals and empires alike to seize control in a world that does not wait for the hesitant. Psychologists have long studied the traits that predict success in competitive environments. Time and time again, we see the same patterns. High levels of ambition, a low sensitivity to fear, and perhaps most controversially, a reduced of empathy for those who stand in the way. This does not mean that all powerful people are psychopaths, but it does mean that many of them possess traits that allow them to act without the emotional constraints that hold others back. Consider the leaders, entrepreneurs, and conquerors who reshaped history, from Julius Caesar to modern business moguls. The pattern is clear: hesitation is a liability, and power is taken, not given. The strong do not wait for permission to lead. They step forward, take risks, and face consequences later. This is why the ruthless often rise, while the hesitant remain in the shadows. But here's the paradox: ruthlessness alone is not enough. Those who wield power without wisdom often face spectacular downfalls. The same qualities that allow a person to climb to the top can also be their undoing. A leader who rules through fear alone will eventually be consumed by the very forces they once controlled. History is littered with tyrants who believed they were invincible until they weren't. So if power is often seized by those who are ruthless, does this mean that morality and fairness are doomed to fail? Not necessarily, but to understand why, we need to challenge one of the greatest illusions of modern society: the belief that the world is fair. From childhood, we are told a comforting story that the world is fair, that good people are rewarded, and that justice will always prevail. Fairy tales. Religious teachings and moral philosophies reinforce this belief. But then, as we step into reality, a brutal contradiction emerges. The hardest workers are not always the wealthiest, the most honest do not always lead, and the kindest hearts are often the most broken. His disconnect is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. The idea of fairness is in many ways a social construct, a narrative designed to maintain order rather than reflect reality. It is a comforting illusion, but an illusion. Nonetheless, power and success are not handed out based on merit alone. They are taken, fought for, and often hoarded by those who understand the game better than others. Psychological research has revealed a phenomenon called the just world fallacy, the tendency to believe that life is inherently fair, that people get what they deserve. This belief is dangerous because it encourages passivity. If we assume that goodness alone will lead to success, we risk ignoring the realities of competition, strategy, and power, and while we wait for justice. Those who do not share our illusions are already moving forward, but does this mean morality is meaningless? Should we abandon all principles in the pursuit of power are not quite the key. The key is to understand the game without becoming a slave to it. Those who suffer the most are often those who believe that simply playing nice will be enough. But those who learn to balance integrity with strategic thinking, who combine kindness with strength, are the ones who rewrite the rules. The truth is this: fairness is not something we can expect, it is something we must create, and that requires power. He saw this struggle as a fundamental part of human existence. His answer was not to surrender to the illusion of fairness, nor to become mindlessly ruthless. Instead, he pointed to something higher, a way to transcend both weakness and cruelty. To understand this, we must explore one of his most revolutionary ideas. The Übermensch, the individual who rises, is beyond morality, beyond illusions, and beyond limitations. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast abyss. Behind you lies the world as it is, filled with injustice, limitations, and the oppressive weight of convention. Before you lies the unknown, a path only the bold dare to walk. Most will hesitate, shackled by fear and doubt, but a few will take the leap. These are the Übermensched individuals who rise above the masses, who forge their own path, and who redefine power on their own terms. Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch, or Overman, is not about brute strength or blind domination. It is about self-overcoming. The Übermensch is someone who refuses to be a victim of circumstances, who does not accept imposed morality without question, and who shapes their own destiny instead of conforming to the expectations of others. At the heart of the Übermensch is the will to power. Unlike the passive morality of submission and guilt, the will to power is about embracing one's deepest instincts to create, to transform, to impose meaning upon a meaningless world. T is not about control over others but control over oneself while the weak are trapped by fear. The Übermensch moves forward untethered from societal illusions. But here's the key. The Übermensch is not ruthless for the sake of cruelty. Unlike the tyrants and manipulators who see power out of insecurity, the Übermensch does not need validation. Their strength comes from within. They do not rely on deception or oppression because their power is self-generated, independent of external approval or fleeting success. This is why the worst people may rise to power, but they will never truly transcend the ruthless. L plays a temporary game, climbing through manipulation and force, but the Übermensch plays the infinite game, building something greater than themselves. They are creators, not just takers. So how do we embody this? How do we navigate a world that rewards the ruthless while refusing to become one of them? The answer lies in understanding power not as a weapon, but as a tool. The next step is learning how to compete in a world that does not wait for the kind-hearted picture. This is stakes game where the rules are written by those who play to win at any cost. If you hesitate, if you assume fairness will protect you, you lose. This is the reality many face in business, politics, and life itself. The ruthless know this. They take what they want. But does this mean you must become like them to survive? Not necessarily. The mistake most people make is believing they only have two choices: a ruthless or be a victim. But there is a third path, one that blends strategic thinking with integrity, one that allows you to compete without losing your soul. Nietzsche's philosophy wasn't about blind domination. It was about transcending weakness while maintaining authenticity. The key is understanding power without being enslaved by it. Here's how one of the biggest weaknesses people have is their belief that life should be fair. It shouldn't. It never was. The strongest competitors accept this early on. They don't waste time complaining about injustice. They learn the rules of the game and use them to their advantage. This doesn't mean abandoning ethics. It means recognizing that power is neutral and those who understand it wield it best. Many fail because they assume kindness alone will bring them success, but power is rarely given. It is taken. That doesn't mean becoming cruel, but it does mean understanding the minds of those who seek to exploit you. Strategic empathy means reading people deeply, recognizing their motives, and anticipating their moves. It allows you to navigate deception without becoming deceptive yourself. Most people are controlled by fear of failure, fear of rejection, and fear of standing alone. The Übermensch, however, develops internal power. This means embracing discomfort, taking risks, and forging your own path despite opposition. The most successful people do not ask for permission. They create opportunities where none exist. There is a difference between mindless ruthlessness and controlled ruthlessness. He first is destruction without purpose. The second is the ability to make hard choices without hesitation. Power requires walking away from toxic relationships, making unpopular decisions, or confronting uncomfortable truths. This is not cruelty, it is strength. The key is knowing when and how to apply it. The ruthless often rise fast, but they also fall hard. Why? Because their power is built on exploitation, not creation. The true Übermensch builds, whether it's a business, an idea, a movement, or a personal transformation. When you create value, you become indispensable. You do not need to manipulate because your power is earned, not stolen. So, can you succeed in a world that rewards the ruthless? Absolutely. But only if you stop playing by the old rules. Stop expecting fairness and start mastering power on your own terms. But this brings us to the ultimate question. Is power itself evil, or is it simply misunderstood power? It's the force that drives the world, shaping the lives of those who possess it and those who are at its mercy. But is power inherently evil? Nietzsche's exploration of power wasn't just about domination. It was about creation. The drive to acquire power, according to Nietzsche, is often misunderstood. It's not about crushing others beneath your boot. It's about surpassing yourself, about transcending the limitations of the current moment and becoming more than you ever imagined. Yet throughout history, power has often been linked to corruption. We've seen countless leaders who, once they gain the reins, fall, prey to ego, greed, and tyranny. This paradox leaves us wondering, is power evil, or does it simply expose the worst parts of human nature? It had argued that power in its purest form isn't about harming others. It's about overcoming oneself, striving for greatness, and creating new values, not succumbing to the moralities imposed by society. However, society's moral compass often makes power seem corrupt. In a world where virtue is championed, the individual who seeks power is often viewed with suspicion. But what if this is a misunderstanding? What if by rejecting conventional morality and creating your own rules, you are simply embodying the truest form of life, one that is raw, unfiltered, and unapologetic? Nietzsche didn't see the will to power as a simple desire for control over others. It was an inner force, a drive to live more fully, to explore the limits of your potential. In this light, power becomes an ethical pursuit, one that challenges you to break free from societal constraints and to define your existence on your own terms. But does this mean that everyone who seeks power is virtuous? Not necessarily. The path to power can be a double-edged sword, leading one either to enlightenment or to destruction. The difference lies in the intent. Is the quest for power a means to impose your will on others, or is it a process of self-overcoming, of crafting a reality that aligns with your highest aspirations? Is power evil? Not inherently. It's a tool, one that when wielded by a person of integrity can lead to unimaginable greatness, but when used for selfish gain or to oppress others, it reveals the darker aspects of human nature. Nietzsche's challenge to us is to rethink power not as something to fear, but as something to master through discipline, strength, and an unwavering commitment to becoming more than we are today. If this exploration of power and success has made you think, challenged your assumptions, and sparked a deeper curiosity about life and philosophy, imagine a bustling gathering hall charged with ambition. Within this space, many different personalities are striving for advancement. Some adhere to principles of honesty, cooperation, and mutual respect. They diligently complete their tasks, uphold a sense of integrity, and hope their virtuous conduct will naturally guide them to recognition and success. Others, however, hold no such compunction. They manipulate, deceive, and occasionally resort to force to climb above everyone else in the room. What is more disconcerting is that these latter individuals, the ones who act with blatant disregard for traditional moral boundaries, often appear to prevail at an astonishing rate. This phenomenon sparks a troubling question. Why do those whom we might label as ruthless or even unethical regularly end up in positions of influence? These sorts of examples abound in many spheres of society, whether it is in politics, commerce, or historical chronicles. We see the pattern repeated over and over. Individuals who do not shy away from betrayal, cunning, manipulation, and domineering strategies frequently catapult themselves to prominence. If that is not unsettling enough, those same individuals sometimes succeed in holding on to their newfound power for substantial periods. causing observers to wonder whether the universe favors that brand of unprincipled behavior. The subject is hardly a modern curiosity. Philosophers, theologians, psychologists, and social commentators across many ages have grappled with it in various ways. Ancient stories are filled with warlords and rulers who employed cruelty to subject entire populations. Modern business culture, similarly, is littered with accounts of executives who sidestepped laws and exploited loopholes to achieve dominance in their industries. We also witness widespread cynicism about the moral fiber of political leaders. So many of us experience a sense of powerlessness when we see these well-documented patterns. On the one hand, a desire to remain morally consistent, and on the other hand, the suspicion that moral consistency can be a hindrance in the brutal contest for success. From a psychological standpoint, certain scholars have taken an interest in the correlation between specific personality traits and professional or societal achievement. We can look to analyses that connect traits like a willingness to take risks, reduced empathy for rivals, and single-minded ambition with better outcomes in high-stakes environments. Although not every successful individual displays pathological traits, those who lack compassion or scruples sometimes appear unencumbered by the doubts or moral quandaries that might hold others back. Yet, for anyone who strives to live ethically, the above realization poses a dilemma. Are we condemned to remain in the shadows if we refuse to adopt cutthroat methods? Should we forfeit our values if we wish to thrive in a system that rewards manipulative tactics? And how do we make sense of the many reports of tyrants who, in the end, brought about their collapse? Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century philosopher, explored these matters with a boldness that unsettled many of his contemporaries. His reflections on power, morality, and human flourishing shook conventional views on ethics and influenced countless thinkers who came after him. In his eyes, concepts like good and evil were not timeless absolutes passed down by some cosmic authority. Instead, they were products of historical power dynamics forged by groups that were either ruling or oppressed. Nietzsche examined this tension in his distinction between what he labeled master morality and slave morality, an idea that helps explain why some individuals benefit from ruthlessness, while others, who champion compassion and honesty, lose out in the struggle for influence. It is vital to clarify that Nietzsche's argument is not a one-sided encouragement of malevolence. His insights provide a new perspective on how moral systems can develop out of power imbalances, and how these systems, in turn, perpetuate further imbalances. Moreover, Nietzsche proposed that certain individuals, whom he labeled overmen in one translation, in German, Übermenschen, might transcend these inherited moral codes entirely, forging new paths of being. Rather than seeking to rule over others for the sheer thrill of dominance, these exceptional figures harness their inner power to create their values, free from both the illusions of naive morality and the cynicism of raw tyranny. In this long essay, we will navigate through these wide-ranging themes. We shall begin by examining the apparent paradox of morally questionable individuals rising to success. Then, we will delve into Nietzsche's famous theory of master morality and slave morality, unraveling how that theory can explain enduring patterns of human behavior. We will also consider broader psychological and evolutionary reasons behind such patterns, referencing historical and contemporary figures to illustrate how ruthlessness both confers advantages and sows seeds of downfall. If it seems that the villains frequently claim the throne, perhaps we should ask ourselves about the mechanics behind that ascension, whether we can challenge those mechanics, and whether there exists a more balanced vision of strength, one that combines strategic insight with moral responsibility. In the pages to follow, we will explore these enigmas through philosophy, psychology, and examples that cut across eras, with the hope of offering not only theoretical reflection, but also hints toward practical wisdom for readers who yearn to uphold their principles in a world often dominated by those who do not. The paradox of ruthless success. In many competitive arenas, the individual unburdened by moral constraints can sometimes outperform the individual who dutifully follows established rules of fair play. This outcome shocks those who believe that goodness should be rewarded and malice punished, Yet, examples of unscrupulous success are not rare. We might consider a corporate setting in which two employees compete for a critical promotion. One candidate is consistently generous with colleagues, shares credit freely, and hesitates to point fingers even when others are clearly at fault. The other candidate has no problem taking credit for tasks others assisted with, exaggerates their achievements, and paints the team player colleague as lacking the bold drive necessary for leadership. Who might the upper management choose if they measure results according to superficial markers and misguided notions of executive presence? It is not always the kindly collaborator. This tension is hardly limited to office politics. Within the tapestry of human history, we frequently spot dominating figures who rose to prominence on the backs of crushed adversaries. They leveraged fear and deception to subdue entire territories, secure wealth, and amass more influence than their humane counterparts. In strictly survival-based terms, success often goes to those who optimize their pursuit of power. When resources, whether they be food, money, energy, or even intangible assets like prestige, are scarce, competition intensifies. Those who shy away from certain methods on moral grounds effectively place voluntary limits on their behavior. Meanwhile, those who scoff at moral scruples have fewer internal blocks to hold them back. This observation is so unsettling because it shakes the comforting illusions we might hold about justice in the world. Many moral teachings, both secular and religious, instruct us to believe that kindness, patience, and honesty will win out, yet the track record of real-world outcomes undermines that comforting promise. We see examples of supposedly upright people languishing or being exploited, while the relentless go-getters acquire massive fortunes, entire corporations, or entire countries, often with little immediate repercussion. To deepen our understanding, however, we should not assume that the game is over once an unethical person reaches the top. The short-term rewards of unscrupulous behavior can indeed be alluring. Still, a subsequent question arises. Does the ruthless individual's reign last forever? Or is there a cycle in which hubris leads to a dramatic fall? History is filled with dramatic downfalls, be it of political regimes that overextended their brutality or of business magnates who found themselves imprisoned for fraud. While that might affirm our faith in ultimate justice, those cautionary tales often occur after widespread damage has already been done. At times, such figures maintain a comfortable position for a significant period. Thus, the paradox stands. Immoral behavior can yield massive gains, yet it may also sow the seeds for eventual collapse. Still, the fact that such collapses can be either slow or uncertain leaves many observers disheartened. One approach to unraveling this paradox is to analyze the structure of power. Often, power is seen as the capacity to affect an outcome, to steer events toward one's advantage. An unscrupulous person who is fixated on that aim can harness the fear or compliance of those around them, using them as pawns in a personal quest. Conscience or empathy can act as brakes on this process, raising second thoughts about who might be hurt or whether certain actions are fair. A morally unconstrained competitor, lacking those brakes, can charge forward with fewer inhibitions. In a purely mechanistic view, that person has an advantage in a world where most participants refuse to stoop to unethical tactics. The problem with operating in that manner is that it cultivates numerous enemies, fosters deep resentments, and runs the risk of a dramatic backlash. Nonetheless, immediate benefits often outweigh long-term risks in the minds of those who crave power. Hence, the paradox is not so much that ruthlessness works universally, but rather that it works often enough and powerfully enough to shake our illusions about how the world ought to function. This puzzle sets the stage for a deeper philosophical investigation. Friedrich Nietzsche, in his writings on morality, power, and the nature of humanity, offers one of the most influential frames through which to interpret this dilemma. His differentiation between master morality and slave morality addresses how those in positions of force shape what is labeled good, and how those who are less powerful craft moral systems around humility, obedience, and the demonization of strength. Master morality and slave morality. When considering why some people who display questionable ethics appear to flourish, we can look at Nietzsche's famous distinction between two overarching moral frameworks that historically vied for dominance. It is critical to note that Nietzsche did not view morality as a single universal truth that applies to all ages and societies. Instead, he saw morality as a historically contingent phenomenon, emerging out of the tensions among groups with differing degrees of power. In the realm that Nietzsche labeled master morality, virtues such as strength, ambition, assertiveness, self-confidence, and the capacity to assert one's will stand paramount. This moral view is cultivated by those who are, in fact, strong enough to shape their environment. Under this orientation, good refers to what is life-affirming, bold, and potent. There is no sense of guilt around the idea of taking what one desires, because those who operate within this moral code believe they have earned or manifested their superiority by their innate qualities or accomplishments. In a master morality framework, those who show timidity or a lack of willpower are automatically lesser and, by extension, not deserving of the same esteem. By contrast, Nietzsche designated slave morality as the moral system that emerges among those who historically found themselves oppressed, powerless, or subjugated. Slave morality is thus rooted in sentiments of resentment and cunning. In this context, what is good becomes aligned with qualities that protect the oppressed: humility, compassion, patience, obedience, submission, and self-sacrifice. Indeed, the weak, who cannot directly challenge the strong, evolve a cunning approach to moralizing. They invert the values of the strong by proclaiming that true virtue lies in refraining from claiming power and that selfishness is inherently sinful. Those who exercise power freely are recast as cruel or wicked. Consequently, the moral teachings that come from this vantage point emphasize piety and altruism, hoping to restrain the strong from abusing their advantage. This dichotomy might shed light on the perennial question of how the unscrupulous can so easily snatch positions of power. People operating in a master morality mode, at least in certain respects, will not shy away from declaring their greatness or imposing their will on the environment. Their moral code supports them in stepping forward, announcing their capabilities, and obtaining what they want directly. They do not feel the same sense of guilt that might plague someone reared in a moral structure that preaches that self-assertion is a sign of arrogance. Hence, individuals aligned with a master morality perspective may well see the world as a landscape that is rightfully there for them to shape. On the other hand, those steeped in slave morality might self-sabotage because they consider pushing for personal benefit to be presumptuous or immoral. They wait, hoping that some cosmic justice will reward their good faith. The difficulty arises when that justice never materializes, at least not in the predictable, timely ways they expect. While they remain cautious, refusing to stoop to perceived arrogance, the more masterful personality type simply grabs the day. This power difference can produce the phenomenon that baffles so many idealists, unscrupulous people appearing to win through the simple act of ignoring moral constraints and going straight for their objectives. It is essential to note that Nietzsche did not claim these moralities are entirely straightforward, or that they encompass the totality of any given individual. An oppressive regime might champion an ideology that poses as humble or religious, while a seemingly powerless group might wrest a surprising moral or psychological victory by asserting a hidden master morality within their subculture. In broad strokes, however, the two categories illustrate contrasting sets of values. Those with a master morality have little interest in seeking external affirmation for their actions. In their eyes, their will, their force of personality, is the measure of all things. Those with a slave morality, on the other hand, yearn for an external judge, a sense of universal right and wrong that might punish bullies and vindicate the meek. We can see then how this approach gives some coherence to the sense that the worst people may thrive. A moral code grounded in strength tends to champion those who do not flinch at using power aggressively, while a moral code rooted in humility might hamper individuals from even attempting to rise too high. Moreover, individuals who are not weighed down by the internal voice that says, "It is wrong to chase glory," or It is wrong to covet wealth or power for oneself, have a competitive edge in societies that reward ambition. At the same time, it would be too simplistic to say that these two moral systems operate in pure isolation. The tension between them, as Nietzsche saw it, spawns continual cultural and ideological struggles, conflicts that play out in religion, politics, and everyday human relations. The illusion of fairness. A pervasive story told in childhood across many cultures is that good behavior eventually meets its reward, and wrongdoing is ultimately penalized. Versions of this story appear in classic folk tales, religious teachings, and even modern films. As we mature, we may be encouraged by elders, teachers, or spiritual leaders to persist in doing the right thing because a cosmic or social order will repay us accordingly. This belief is comforting because it promises that no malevolent deed goes unpunished and no virtuous deed remains unrewarded. Yet as soon as we step into the complexities of adult society, a cruel contradiction emerges. We see unethical leaders who maintain their power over extended periods, amassing lavish fortunes and establishing dynastic legacies. Meanwhile, we find conscientious and generous souls who struggle financially, endure exploitation from manipulative superiors, or watch as their moral stance wins them mockery rather than respect. Our sense of a fair world is repeatedly dealt harsh blows, forcing a painful re-evaluation of the illusions instilled in our upbringing. Psychologists call this tendency to assume inherent justice in the universe the just world phenomenon. Although we are avoiding numerical digits here, suffice it to say that there have been many studies that confirm its existence as a fairly widespread psychological bias. People who hold the just world view often respond to reports of suffering by attributing blame to the victim, as though they must have done something to earn such misfortune. Conversely, they believe that those who succeed must have done so through fair means. While this perspective helps keep anxiety at bay, because it offers a sense of moral order in an unpredictable world, it can also trap individuals in dangerous complacency. If we assume that good behavior will naturally yield positive outcomes, we might refrain from taking proactive steps to secure our interests. Meanwhile, those who face no such illusions are already maneuvering strategically. This gap between the assumption of fairness and the reality of competition fosters resentment and confusion. Some people wake up in middle age to discover that the playing field has been rigged all along, or that the rules have been written by participants who do not care one whit about moral constraints. This realization can generate deep cynicism. Others, upon seeing how the unscrupulous flourish, decide that the only way to survive is to adopt those same methods. Thus, an entire social environment can be captured by a race to the bottom, in which more and more participants feel compelled to jettison moral values to keep pace with the truly ruthless. Here, one might wonder if moral values have any objective grounding at all. One line of thought might hold that morality is purely a social construct that serves to keep weaker members safe from the predatory instincts of the strong. Nietzsche certainly regarded many moral teachings, especially those rooted in religious traditions, as slave morality systems that had, as a hidden motive, the taming of more potent individuals. Whether one sees that as an evolutionary necessity or a moral triumph depends on one's perspective. Regardless, the tension remains. If a system extolling humility and compassion was built to hold back aggressors, it is perhaps inevitable that the aggressors who ignore that system will find themselves unopposed by those who remain tethered to moral illusions. What emerges from these insights is the realization that fairness is not a stable foundation for success. What some term fairness is, in many spheres, an aspiration rather than a fact. Political and economic systems, despite claiming adherence to justice, are riddled with loopholes, special interests, and shifting alliances. Ethical guidelines in professional life can be easily twisted to serve those who know how to exploit them, leaving the unsuspecting or overly trusting individual at a disadvantage. Thus, the illusions we were taught in childhood do not serve as effective guides in highly competitive real-world scenarios. Evolutionary and psychological roots. To better understand why those lacking scruples might more easily claim power, we might look beyond moral philosophy and consider evolutionary biology and psychology. The impulse to dominate, to climb hierarchies, and to secure resources for oneself or one's kin is reflected in many species. Although humans have cultivated advanced social constructs, laws, and ethical systems at heart, we are still primates programmed to navigate social hierarchies in ways that ensure survival and reproduction. In certain contexts, aggression, deception, and cunning can be adaptive traits that help an individual secure an advantageous position. This is not to say that empathy, cooperation, and altruism have no place. These are also crucial to the success of social groups. However, the tension between pro-social traits and exploitative traits is a dynamic that shapes human societies. The most successful groups, from an evolutionary standpoint, often balance the capability for cooperation with the potential for decisive aggression against external threats or internal freeloaders. Yet within those groups, individuals who can skillfully manipulate the group's cooperative framework for personal gain may find themselves rising more quickly than the naive altruists around them. Psychologically, certain traits such as lower levels of empathy, higher levels of assertiveness, and greater impulsive risk-taking can facilitate success in cutthroat environments. Some individuals also display a reduced sensitivity to guilt and a capacity to rationalize their harmful actions. When placed in a context where competition is fierce and oversight may be minimal, these traits can translate into tangible rewards. The moral or emotional qualms that would hinder someone else simply do not apply in the same way. Still, evolution does not favor unregulated cruelty in all scenarios. Groups that become too disordered or too terrorized may fracture, undermining the benefits of collective security. In addition, peer coalitions can arise to check the power of an overly aggressive member. Yet, so long as the unscrupulous individual can charm or intimidate potential allies, the coalition might remain on that person's side, at least until a better alternative comes along. The cunning leader learns to keep enough supporters satisfied to avoid an insurrection while systematically removing potential threats. In this sense, the presence of apparently immoral leadership is less a surprise and more a reflection of age-old survival strategies. Though we pride ourselves on moral and legal structures that regulate behavior, those structures inevitably have loopholes, shades of ambiguity, or enforcement issues that the cunning may exploit. Even in supposedly fair and open societies, we observe the phenomenon of regulatory capture, in which private interests influence or override government agencies meant to police them. We also see cultural or ideological manipulation at a mass scale, in which public discourse is steered by relentless propaganda. None of these is evidence of a universal conspiracy. Rather, they speak to how power tends to concentrate in the hands of those willing to take advantage of the system's vulnerabilities. Nietzsche's concept of the overman, Übermensch. Although Nietzsche's commentary on morality and power often highlights how the strong mold the social order, his philosophy extends beyond a simple worship of brute force. At its core, Nietzsche's vision puts forth an ideal of personal transformation, in which a remarkable individual transcends both the naive illusions of slave-like morality and the crude domination of tyrannical power. Nietzsche referred to this potential being as the overman, often translated from the German term Übermensch. To visualize what Nietzsche meant by the overman, picture an individual who stands at the edge of all that is familiar and socially approved, looking into the unknown. Society's norms, taboos, and moral dogmas appear as limitations to this figure. While ordinary people remain confined by these limits, some passively obedient, others cynically exploiting them, the overman leaps beyond them, forging a personal path guided by self-created values. This leap involves a sense of self-overcoming that is distinct from the raw aggression of a power-hungry ruler. The overman does not need to dominate others to validate a sense of worth. Rather, this figure shapes the world through creative force, forging new ideals and possibilities. In simpler terms, the overman harnesses the will to power in a personal or internal sense, rather than merely craving control of external bodies or institutions. This is a key point for distinguishing a Nietzschean overman from a typical tyrant. The tyrant might well exemplify master morality, but he or she is often trapped in a cycle of endless conquests, insecurity, and paranoia about potential rivals. The overman, as Nietzsche envisioned, retains absolute sovereignty over his or her inner life. It is a kind of existential revolution, an affirmation of life's potential that refuses to be pulled down by fear, guilt, or reliance on external validation. Within this framework, the worst people who succeed might be adopting aspects of master morality, but they remain short of the overman ideal because they continue to be slaves to their insecurities and destructive impulses. They conquer others without conquering themselves. In Nietzsche's view, raw ambition untempered by a higher purpose can be as pitiful as the make submission that slave-like morality encourages. Both are trapped, one by a never-ending appetite for external power, the other by a self-imposed sense of limits and fear of standing out. The overman, meanwhile, is freed from illusions of cosmic justice or universal moral laws. Instead, this individual takes responsibility for crafting life's direction, often in a way that transcends established categories of good and evil. Such a figure might appear ruthless to the conventional moralist, but the guiding principle is not petty cruelty. It is self-creation and self-overcoming. For this reason, Nietzsche championed the importance of pushing beyond comfort zones, welcoming challenges, and affirming the passions that society might regard with suspicion. In that sense, Nietzsche's overman is often misunderstood by those who see it only as an endorsement of cruelty or elitism. A more nuanced reading clarifies that the overman concept is about forging new and life-enhancing values, not merely crushing the weak or reveling in barbarity. Thus, Nietzsche's writing on the overman suggests a possibility for those who wish to break free from the illusions that hamper success without descending into brutal cynicism. By understanding power as something that originates within oneself, a kind of animating force that drives creativity, one might engage the world with boldness and authenticity while avoiding the ethical pitfalls of pure exploitation. This is, of course, an ideal, and Nietzsche recognized the overman as a rarity. Nonetheless, it throws a challenge to the rest of us. If we are troubled by the victory of ruthless actors, perhaps we should inquire into how to cultivate a power grounded in self-mastery and self-expression rather than a morality that keeps us docile or naive. We may discover that true greatness calls for a balance of strength, self-awareness, and compassionate insight, transcending both the helpless stance of the victim and the cold stance of the oppressor, competing without losing your soul. At this juncture, a question comes to the forefront. How can one navigate a competitive environment that often rewards ruthless strategies without abandoning one's moral sense entirely? Must we all transform into cynics or Machiavellian tacticians to stand a chance? Or is there a way to be effective and successful while still holding on to ethical principles? One of the perennial mistakes people make is believing they have only two choices: passively follow a rule-bound morality and hope for the best, or abandon morality altogether and become a predator. Perhaps a better alternative is to adopt a strategic mindset that comprehends how power functions in the real world, while retaining a sense of personal integrity. This approach might involve several key shifts in perspective. First, discard the naive belief that the world should be fair. Acknowledging that many of life's systems contain hidden biases or favor those who cheat can prevent the shock and disappointment that paralyzes well-meaning individuals. Adopting a more realistic outlook is not the same as condoning exploitation. It merely means recognizing that some people do exploit. Armed with that awareness, you can plan more shrewdly, avoiding traps set by those who aim to misuse your trust. Second, cultivate what some researchers call strategic empathy. This is a capacity to understand the motives and tactics of others, especially those who might be unscrupulous. Instead of projecting your values onto them, learn to see how they view the world. By doing so, you can anticipate manipulations or ambushes more effectively. Strategic empathy does not require you to become manipulative yourself. It merely protects you from naive assumptions. Third, develop an internal sense of power. Much of what holds morally inclined individuals back is fear. Fear of conflict, fear of losing approval, fear of stepping on toes. However, if you study leadership, whether in small teams or large institutions, you will find that decisive action often garners respect, even from those who might initially disagree. Building internal power means embracing risk, making firm decisions, and facing potential criticism without being paralyzed by it. True leadership entails the capacity to stand alone, if necessary, to act by your principles, even when external approval is not guaranteed. Fourth, learn the difference between mindless ruthlessness and controlled toughness. A strategic leader might use a firm stance, deliver harsh truths, or exit toxic alliances, but does so with a rational plan rather than from raw cruelty. Such an individual can still demonstrate compassion or flexibility at the right moments, but does not shy away from necessary confrontations. In many stories, the moral figure fails because they conflate being moral with never upsetting anyone. That confusion is a recipe for stagnation. Fifth, focus on creation rather than mere appropriation. Although unscrupulous power grabbers may quickly seize control, they often contribute little of lasting value. Their success might be built on illusions or intimidation that ultimately unravel. By focusing on genuine value creation, whether in business, community projects, personal relationships, or creative endeavors, you develop a form of influence that is more sustainable. Those who stand for something larger than themselves gather genuine allies, not just frightened subordinates. In weaving these insights together, one can see how it is possible to be neither the blindly idealistic person who waits in vain for cosmic justice, nor the cold-hearted cynic who cares nothing for moral principles. Instead, a third path allows for both practicality and principle. Nietzsche's writings, especially his notion of the overman, suggest that the best route to true power is self-overcoming and self-creation, not subjugation of others. While that concept remains somewhat lofty for everyday practice, it can inspire us to discover a personal blueprint for how to engage the world confidently, yet ethically. Reflections on historical case studies. Beyond the realm of abstract theory, one can explore numerous real-world accounts that illustrate the intersection of moral considerations and the pursuit of power. Although it is not feasible to provide a complete timeline without digits in this text, we can still paint a broad picture of how this paradox of ruthless success has appeared across various eras. Consider a much romanticized period in history, the medieval or feudal landscape in many parts of the globe. A warlord or king might seize territory by force, imposing harsh rule over conquered populations. Such figures sometimes maintained power through intimidation for a considerable span. Yet their fear-based regimes occasionally collapsed quickly once a stronger or equally ruthless rival emerged. Alternatively, some kingdoms that sustained themselves longest were led by rulers who combined martial strength with a code of justice that persuaded subjects of their legitimacy. Such rulers were neither naive nor especially gentle by modern standards, but they recognized that an entirely fear-based reign was unstable. In that sense, they reflected an early form of the strategic approach referenced earlier. Be strong enough to defeat challengers, but also wise enough to secure genuine loyalty. Moving into more recent centuries, consider the dawn of large-scale corporations. The titans of that industrial era often rose to prominence through tactics that would be deemed unethical in most societies, exploiting labor, destroying competitors through unsavory strategies, or capturing markets through monopoly-like schemes. While many of these magnates faced eventual backlash in the form of legal or public opinion constraints, it is worth noting how long they maintained and grew their empires before meaningful checks arose. In response to such abuses, new regulations and public movements emerged, championing fairness and worker rights, which is reminiscent of the slave morality dynamic, an oppressed group forging a set of moral imperatives that attempt to restrain the strong. In modern politics and geopolitics, we see frequent headlines about leaders accused of corruption, human rights violations, or shameless populism. Some manipulate mass media, stifle dissent, or rewrite laws to entrench their rule. These tactics, while brazen, can sustain them for substantial stretches, yet repeated historical patterns suggest that such dominance is brittle. Those leaders inevitably face either external intervention, internal revolt, or the creeping rot of institutional failure. Nevertheless, those processes can be drawn out and do not always align with the moral convictions that suggest tyrants should face immediate and decisive justice. Across these and other examples, one overarching theme remains. Unscrupulous leaders or opportunists can rise swiftly and effectively because they exploit weaknesses in the moral and structural frameworks that ostensibly protect ordinary participants. Their downfall, if it comes, is often caused by an equal or greater power shift, underscoring that success in that realm depends more on strategic advantage than on moral worth. While that may be bleak, it also can serve as a reminder that the only lasting defense against the unscrupulous is for others to cultivate both moral conviction and effective power. Is power evil or neutral? A question that arises from the observations thus far is whether power itself is to blame. Is the quest for dominance inherently wicked, or is power more akin to a neutral tool, its value determined by the intent of the user? Many religious and moral traditions throughout history have cast suspicion on power and wealth, warning that they corrupt the human heart. There is a familiar proverb stating that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The idea is that once someone gains extensive control over others, that control warps their ethical compass, magnifying vanity, greed, and cruelty. However, Nietzsche's idea of the will to power complicates this view. He suggests that the driving force behind human innovation, art, exploration, and aspiration is this same will to power. For him, it is not merely a thirst to rule over others, but a fundamental impulse to expand, create, and express potency in the world. From that perspective, power is not inherently good or evil. It is an energy that can be harnessed in myriad ways, from building philanthropic institutions or creating transformative inventions to orchestrating destructive wars. The moral direction of power depends on the framework of values adopted by the individual or society that wields it. This helps explain why many cultural contexts attempt to impose checks and balances on the use of power, whether through laws, ethical codes, or social norms. The cynics, however, highlight how easily these checks can be circumvented by those who do not care about moral constraints. Hence, the real question might not be, is power evil? But rather, how can power be harnessed ethically and sustainably? Nietzsche's Overman concept suggests that genuine self-mastery can elevate power from mere domination to something more akin to personal or cultural artistry. In other words, if we see power as a means of self-overcoming and creative expression, it can lead to significant achievements that benefit both the individual and society. When viewed as a mere instrument for controlling or oppressing others, power can spiral into tyranny. Moreover, the difference between those two uses of power often resides in how an individual handles the seductive aspects of influence and success. Does one use newly acquired authority to elevate a community, solve pressing issues, or foster further creativity? Or does one simply aim to accumulate more personal wealth, status, and the ability to humiliate rivals? The decision is rarely clear-cut, and people may rationalize self-serving actions as somehow being for the greater good. Still, the moment self-reflection is lost, and the pursuit of power becomes an end in itself, the corrosive potential emerges. Understanding these nuances might, at the very least, dispel the notion that moral individuals must avoid power altogether. Abdicating power to the manipulative can worsen societal conditions. If people who possess integrity systematically shy away from leadership, that abdication leaves a vacuum that the most ruthless are all too happy to fill. The question, then, is how ethical people can learn to navigate power more effectively without falling into the trap of either cynicism or naive idealism. In many competitive environments, it is not the most compassionate or principled who reach the summit, but rather those who manipulate, deceive, or force their way upward. The concept of a just world, taught from childhood, seems to crumble under the weight of these recurring examples. Our moral convictions can appear naive when confronted with the Machiavellian feats of the cutthroat. Yet, as our journey through these concepts has revealed, this victory of the ruthless is neither surprising nor universally permanent. It is a reflection of deep-rooted evolutionary impulses, social structures built around competition for scarce resources, and the illusions about fairness that we hold onto at our peril. Nietzsche's theories help illuminate the philosophical tension behind the rise of unscrupulous leaders. Master morality values strength, self-assertion, and the will to shape the world, whereas slave morality praises humility and obedience. Individuals aligned with master morality do not hesitate in their pursuit of ambition, and so they often seize advantages. Those raised in moral systems that prioritize restraint may balk at the boldness required to contest the powerful. Meanwhile, illusions of fairness lull many into passivity, preventing them from effectively challenging those who do not care about moral guidelines. Yet Nietzsche also envisioned a higher state of being, exemplified in the figure he called the Übermensch. This being transcends conventional morality altogether, not out of cruelty, but out of a drive for self-overcoming and creative power. True self-mastery, in Nietzsche's sense, is neither subjugation nor submission, but the forging of one's oath in life, unbound by illusions, yet also not governed by petty appetites for domination. Although the Overman concept may strike some as overly ambitious or even utopian, it offers a reminder that there is more to power than crass domination. Indeed, a person might learn to blend strategic insight with moral commitment, building structures that endure because they are rooted in genuine value creation, not exploitation. For those who wonder how to survive, or even thrive, without resorting to unethical conduct, several practical insights emerge. Ceasing to rely on the comforting myth that good deeds are always rewarded is an essential step toward mature engagement with the world. Cultivating an awareness of how power operates, both in oneself and in social systems, provides a shield against manipulation. Embracing the role of a decisive actor rather than a fearful bystander is critical, but that need not imply cruelty. Instead, a willingness to make hard decisions, to set and enforce boundaries, and to call out wrongdoing when necessary can exist in harmony with an ethic of care and respect. Finally, emphasizing creation rather than appropriation can offer a more stable path to influence, as value creation secures a deeper kind of loyalty and respect. In the end, we can affirm that while the most ruthless among us might indeed succeed with alarming frequency, they are not immune to eventual consequences. History is filled with fallen despots and disgraced magnates, testifying to the transient nature of raw domination. However, waiting for hubris to bring them down is a passive posture that cedes too much ground. If more people integrate a nuanced view of power, recognizing its dangers and harnessing its creative potential, they may diminish the openings that allow exploiters to rise unchallenged in the first place. No simple formula can permanently solve the paradox of ruthless success. The impulses that drive competition are deeply ingrained, and moral systems will likely remain contested arenas for generations to come. Nonetheless, by rejecting naive illusions and choosing a path of informed engagement, we might chart a course that neither shies away from power nor wields it as a blunt weapon of oppression. In doing so, we step closer to what Nietzsche might have hoped, a world where human beings continuously transcend their limitations and affirm life through willful self-creation, rather than remain ensnared in repetitive cycles of subjugation and resentment. Such is the challenge left to those who sense that a higher form of power exists, one that is creative, self-aware, and fundamentally life-affirming. It is a challenge that demands not just intellectual understanding, but also the courage to act. And while there is no guarantee of external reward, it at least offers a sense of integrity and purpose that can stand firm, even in a world where the ruthless often seem to succeed.